I hate Dungeons and Dragons.
I really like Dungeons and Dragons. I've made that no secret. This is primarily a Dungeons and Dragons and also drama channel, but in the past, I have expressed a dislike for many aspects of not just Dungeons and Dragons, but some other tabletop role-playing games too. And people sometimes ask me, Crispy, why do you hate these things? And today, I'm here to tell you. I have compiled a list of 5 petty hatreds that I have within the D&D game space, and I'm going to explain why I dislike these things, and maybe explaining why you could learn something from my dislike. Now, let me make this clear. These are all petty and stupid hatreds. These are not meant to be taken too seriously. These are my personal beefs. You do not need to hate the same things that I hate. In fact, I wouldn't even really call these hatreds. Like I said before, these are petty. But I do think there are lessons that can be learned from some of my petty beefs. So, without further ado, guys, let's get started. Okay, first off, we're starting out a little bit light.
I hate Roll20.
Alright, I don't really hate Roll20, but I do think that Roll20 is massively overused, and in the virtual tabletop space, I think there are other VTTs that fill its role way better. I have made my love for the virtual tabletop Foundry very well known. I love its payment structure, one-time pay, and that's it. If you want to use their cloud service, it's a very cheap monthly subscription, or in my case, annual subscription. On top of that, Foundry's UI is just so well done and well put together, and any features that I feel like are missing from the website, well, there's a plethora of community developers making very high quality modules that are extremely easy to download. Literally all you do is press copy paste on a link, and then that's it. The easiest modding experience I've had in anything, video game or tabletop related. It's wonderful. And then you look back on Roll20. Roll20 can be used for free with a plethora of ads everywhere, which I'm sorry, I'm not interested in as a consumer. I don't like looking at ads in general, and when I'm trying to focus on running a tabletop game, they can be extremely distracting in my mind. The UI is also, in my opinion, very outdated. I do not like the UI of Roll20. Maybe it's just because I haven't used Roll20 for years upon years, but I find it to be just painful to navigate and to organize in. Roll20's organizational features are also not as good. A virtual tabletop becomes the central point for your online game. So I want to use something that's going to be worthwhile as a central point. I'm not going to endure inconveniences for something that's so important to my game, especially since there are so many other options out there. There are so many videos going into virtual tabletops, and I almost never see Roll20 get any vague praise besides there's a free version. Seriously, I only use Roll20 when I occasionally need to look up rules, in which case it's really nice. But besides that, I would never make Roll20 the core of my game, just because the minor inconveniences are enough for me to turn away because there are just other options out there. In general, when you're playing tabletop games, if you're dealing with a lot of inconveniences in something that is really important to your game, look for other options, because in an industry that's existed for this long, there are plenty of them out there. Not just for virtual tabletops, but for just anything in general. Okay, the Monster Manual. The 2014 Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Monster Manual is bad. It's really bad. I don't like it. I really don't like how so many of these monsters are just bags of hit points with a multi-attack and maybe a gimmick if you're lucky. Now, there are decent monsters. Like, I think the Beholder is pretty good. The dragons are terrible. They're literally all reskins, which I don't like. I mean, some of them can breathe underwater. That's cool, I guess. I mean, seriously, for a game called Dungeons and Dragons, I'm surprised that the stats around dragons are so plain and derivative of each other. I actually am pretty happy with at least the dragons I've seen in the 2024 Monster Manual so far, because they at least lean into the identity of the individual dragon types a little bit more. Like, for example, the green dragon has some abilities associated with charming because the green dragon is all about manipulating people. So I think that that's a really neat gimmick, but the 2014 Monster Manual, yeah, it was not doing any of that stuff. I know everyone is already expecting this, but I'm gonna be real, I've hated the 2014 Monster Manual even before I found Matt Colville's Flea Mortals. I mean, I started DMing and playing D&D in 2016, 2017, and that was way before Matt Colville released the first playtest for Flea Mortals or even kickstarted the project. So, in essence, I've been trying to find homebrew monsters to replace the Monster Manual monsters for forever, just because encounters after only like 5 months started feeling so samey. I like things that are dynamic. I like encounters that feel unique. Like Flea Mortals, as I've said many times, does this very, very well. Each monster has more than just like a different elemental damage type, or the ability to maybe breathe underwater, or maybe a couple spells from the player's handbook if you're getting really spicy with it. In Matt Colville's Monster Manual, Flea Mortals, you have a lot of unique abilities that are specific to just that monster that really seriously change the dynamic of the fight. Like a death rattle mechanic that makes it so that if you kill the monster, it deals a decent amount of damage to you in return, meaning that you want to stay away from that monster when you are killing it so you don't get the splashback damage when you deal that final blow. Or maybe a mechanic that really is beneficial to the players. Like for example, the skeletons will literally blow up and deal damage in an area if you hit them with like thunder or bludgeoning damage. So if you're fighting a group of skeletons and they're all packed together, dealing thunder damage can really easily wipe them out in a massive chain reaction. It's great. Each encounter starts feeling unique, and that is the design mentality I took when designing my own monsters. I don't want just grab bags of hit points with a multi-attack. Oh, and also, I really dislike how the Monster Manual just uses baseline D&D spells for the monsters. Like, okay, it's fine sometimes. Like, Lightning Bolt is Lightning Bolt. Fireball is Fireball. Like, those are pretty simple spells, and therefore, yeah, I could just take the player's handbook version of those spells and put them on a monster. But sometimes, I want something that gives a monster a bit more oomph. Like, Matt Colville's Lich can literally rip your bones out of your body and cripple your character until you get some supernatural healing. That's a brutal image, and is really great and strikes some fear into some players. Whereas, like, the Monster Manual Lich, he just uses the same spells that, like, players use and probably have access to by the time they reach him. Boring. Look, am I saying the Monster Manual is good for nothing? No. I think it's great for beginners. Like, if you're a brand new dungeon master, I think this design philosophy with simpler monsters is great. I've talked about this before, but a friend of mine asked me for stat blocks, and I sent him Flea Mortal stat blocks just because that's what I had in my drive, and I regret that. Those stat blocks are not really beginner friendly. They are more for dungeon masters who have a little bit of experience. And by a little bit of experience, I literally mean like maybe like a few months to a year. I mean, you really don't need that much experience to get into Flea Mortals. It's not rocket science. But if you're brand spanking new, never played at all before, I think the Monster Manual will do something for you. But I think the fact that it only appeals to beginners, I think that says a lot about the quality of the monsters and how annoying it can be if you've been playing D&D 5th edition or any edition of D&D for a while. So in essence, why do I dislike the Monster Manual? I dislike the Monster Manual because it is under-designed and only appeals to people who just got into the game. And again, that's great for those people, but eventually you are going to be an experienced dungeon master. Like, as you play D&D, you're going to become experienced at one point or another, and you're going to want more out of the game, and the Monster Manual just doesn't give it. Look, over-designing can have its problems, but I prefer to have too many options that I can take out than too few options where I need to add them in. Adding new stuff is so much harder than just taking out stuff I don't need. So yeah, under-designing is just one big old pet peeve of mine. Alright guys, it's time to keep the book trend going. You all know about this one. If you watch my skits and my horror stories, I talk all the time about how I don't like Hoard the Dragon Queen. Is it because I had some horrible RPG horror story in Hoard the Dragon Queen? No, it's because when I first started out playing Dungeons & Dragons, I was looking through which module I wanted to play for my first ever module. And luckily, in recent years, WotC has released some pretty dang good beginner modules for new dungeon masters, and I'm sure that trend will continue when they release the new game as well. But moving back to the point, Hoard the Dragon Queen is one of the ones I looked at because it released very closely to the release of 5th edition in general, so a lot of people gravitated towards it, including myself, and God, that was one awful reading experience. Hoard the Dragon Queen is boring as hell. It's all just build up to Tiamat being released, and that begs the question, why not just start with Tiamat being released? That's where all the cool stuff is. Hoard the Dragon Queen just doesn't give a lot for the players or the DM to work with. It feels like a really minimal book. It's especially bad when you look at modules that released more recently, or even modules that released a little bit after Hoard the Dragon Queen, like Curse of Strahd. And God forbid you look at something like Rime of the Frost Maiden or Critical Role's Call of the Netherdeep, both of which offer so many more options. Hoard the Dragon Queen also gives you very little bang for your buck when it comes to just general information. A lot of the NPCs there are just very bland and, in my opinion, not worth adding into any of your other campaigns. And in terms of stat blocks in Hoard the Dragon Queen itself, it offers so many less. In my opinion, as I was reading through the book, I saw too many times where I'd want to go back to the monster manual to grab monsters to fill in. And yeah, you already know my feelings on the monster manual, so that's no points either. So in essence, why do I dislike Hoard the Dragon Queen? What's the overall reason? The overall reason is because Hoard of the Dragon Queen just is not a lot of fun for the time investment it takes to play it. Hoard the Dragon Queen is a module that's going to take me like months. It's a long form campaign, or at least it's supposed to be. But why would I run this? Like, what's the purpose? If I want Tiamat story, I can homebrew one that's better than this, because honestly, there's just not much story going on here in general, so I'll just make it up myself. Or I'll just skip to Rise of Tiamat, which is at least a half-decent dragon-based adventure. It's even worse if I'm not interested in the dragon adventure in general, because there are just so many better modules that D&D has released over the years. Like, I'm not interested in most modules, but if I'm going to run a module adventure, there are really good ones. I want my time to be respected by the adventure that I play. And I want it to be an adventure that's better than what I could just homebrew myself. And Hoard the Dragon Queen is just not that. Watching paint dry would be a better use of my time. I don't like flying. I have joked about this in the past as well during horror stories, and some people question it, and I completely understand why. Look, flying is really not that big of a deal in D&D. Like, just have an enemy with a decent range attack, or hell, just have a building with a roof on it. I mean, how many encounters actually happen outdoors? I mean, honestly, it's a minority, at least in my games. Most of the time, my players are playing within a closed space. So flying really wouldn't be that big of a deal. And my players are not the kind of people who would, like, try to exploit flying, because they like the danger and the risk, too. Having a character that just flies, like, 1,000 feet in the air, it's just not something that my players are interested in. It's a boring play style. So why do I dislike flying? Simply because it's a pain for me to keep track of. Look, this is a petty thing, and it's probably just a me thing, but when I'm playing D&D, I've got a lot going on. Like, my combats are pretty intricate. There's a lot of arena mechanics. The monsters themselves have a lot of their own special abilities that I need to remember. And on top of that, I do a lot of sound effects and music, so I'm also acting as a DJ the whole time. Not really. I mean, I'm sure DJing is harder than whatever the hell I'm doing. But look, the point is, there's a lot of things that are going on in my game, and the less things I need to keep track of, the better. I mean, I'm already dealing with a ton of negative status conditions on the players. I also don't want to remember how high they are on the battle map, because I play on a 2D terrain. So often, it's just more pain than it's worth to keep track of how high my players are flying and which ones are flying in the first place. Like, yeah, I can use condition markers to do that, but so often, it just feels like it doesn't matter. Minimizing the amount of things I need to keep track of in my game is a major priority for me. Hence why I tell my players, flying is actually okay, but I want your butt to be on the ground by the end of it. And I follow the same rules for my monsters. Like, if a dragon is flying, swooping over the players, we don't really roll initiative against it. The players don't even try to fight enemies like dragons or rocks that are continuously flying. Initiative starts when they force the dragon to the ground somehow. which also, in my experience, brought up interesting mechanics with the player characters themselves, finding ways to ground flying monsters so that initiative can properly start. Look, this is clearly a skill issue for me, but again, minimizing the things that I need to worry about is always a priority whenever I'm DMing Dungeons & Dragons. It's the same reason why I don't control my party's NPC followers. I have them control them instead, because having them keep track of that stuff is always better than me keeping track of that stuff. The same thing applies to flying. We've been going on for a long time, and honestly, my throat is getting sore. So let's finish this off with a really controversial one. I hate pantheons, I hate gods, and I don't like world building. So, you might be asking yourself, Crispy, what the hell are you talking about? You said you wrote like a 100-page document detailing your homebrew world. You have to like world building. And yeah, I like building lore, not a world. Let me explain the difference that honestly probably only exists in my head. I like building a world with a lot of questions and not a lot of hard rules. Let's take gods as the primary example. I don't write gods. Like, I don't write that this is the god of light, this is the god of death, this is the god of war, etc., etc., etc. I don't have a set list of what gods exist. I have religions. Different religions have different ideas and interpretations of what the gods are and what their will is. I mean, this is a fantasy world. It's clear that some kind of godly or powerful being exists out there, but what do they look like? What do they want? In my world, those things are often up to interpretation. There are gods that have walked amongst mortals in living memory, but all of them are horrifying villains like Vecna, or creepy enigmatic figures like the Raven Queen, goddess of death. So a lot of religions are really desperate to find and prove the existence of something out there that's a lot more benevolent than these beings, and I think that creates a more interesting world. I did have a list of gods. I wrote down a whole pantheon, but I mean, it was boring. I wasn't interested in most of these figures. I found the questions that arose from the beliefs of mortals to be much more fascinating than just a set list. I think this philosophy in general makes for more interesting worlds. Creating a world filled with questions and not a lot of answers makes it more interesting for your players to investigate. Look, I'm not saying that my entire world is vague nonsense. I mean, I have a set timeline. There are historical events that definitely happened, but I do also add mysteries because those could be hooks for future adventures. I write a world that is purposefully unfinished. If you're a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, you're familiar with this feeling. George R. R. Martin's world is unfinished. The Game of Thrones books are not done. But I don't know, man. There's a beauty to that for me. I like that there's so many questions. It makes the world more interesting. I have spent so much more time investing myself in Martin's world than I have in a world like Tolkien's where the story is done and a lot of the questions are answered. I just like mysteries. It's my personal preference when it comes to world building, and I think in the world of D&D, that kind of philosophy is so much more beneficial for a game. We're not writing a book. We're writing a story that people participate in, writing hooks and mysteries for them to investigate and questions that you leave unanswered. I think that just makes your world a lot more interesting to play in. But yeah, my throat is killing me, so I think it's time for us to end off this episode. What are your petty hatreds in tabletop role-playing games? Stupid things that you don't like, that no one else cares about, but you just feel boiling in your blood. Let me know in the comments. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed this episode, then you might enjoy our latest episode of RPG Horror Stories. We were eating good in that one. 2 sides to a story with lots of receipts. Lots of fun. It's linked in the cards, but before you go, please do leave a like on this one if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to Crispy's Tavern so you don't miss any of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment petty beef to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell. I think that just makes your world a lot more interesting to play in.